The strange and chilling case of Roberta Elder, dubbed Mrs. Bluebeard by the Pittsburgh Courier on August 29, 1954, is a disturbing tale of systematic and calculated murder for financial gain. Elder, one of Atlanta's most notorious serial killers, committed a series of murders that targeted her own family members, using poison as her weapon of choice. The story of her crimes, particularly the murder of her husband, her children, and others close to her, gripped the public with its morbid details. Roberta Elder's early life remains largely a mystery, with few documented details about her upbringing or family background. Born in the early 1900s, it is believed that Roberta was born in Georgia, though specific details about her birth date and early family life are not well recorded. What is known is that she married multiple times, with her first marriage possibly taking place during her early adulthood. Like many women of her era, Elder was likely expected to manage household duties and take care of children, a role she would later exploit in her nefarious plans. One of the earliest and most pivotal deaths in Roberta Elder's murderous spree was that of her husband, John Woodward. He died under suspicious circumstances in 1952, and the investigation into his death would eventually lead to the unraveling of Roberta's web of deceit and murder. John Woodward's death was initially believed to be from natural causes. According to accounts, he had been sick for several days, suffering from severe gastrointestinal issues. During his illness, Roberta appeared to be a dutiful and caring wife, feeding him bananas and cheese, which seemed like a nurturing gesture. However, this act of caregiving concealed her darker intent. Unbeknownst to those around her, Roberta had laced these foods with arsenic, a slow-acting poison that caused symptoms similar to many common illnesses, such as food poisoning or gastrointestinal disease. Woodward's health rapidly declined, and he eventually died. His death did not raise immediate suspicion because the symptoms he exhibited aligned with common illnesses. At the time, medical knowledge and investigative practices were not advanced enough to detect arsenic poisoning without specific tests, which were rarely conducted unless foul play was strongly suspected. Roberta's behavior after her husband's death raised few alarms. She portrayed herself as the grieving widow, receiving sympathy from her community. However, Roberta quickly collected a life insurance payout from her husband's policy, which, in hindsight, was part of her larger pattern of murder for financial gain. The murders committed by Roberta Elder extended far beyond her husband. Over the years, she systematically killed her own children, stepchildren, and other relatives. One of the most tragic victims was her 4-year-old child, who was also poisoned. The child, like many of her other victims, fell ill and died, with the cause of death attributed to illness at the time. One by one, her family members perished. Investigators later discovered that in each case, Roberta had taken out life insurance policies on her victims shortly before their deaths. Life insurance was common during this era as a means of providing financial security for grieving families. Roberta, however, viewed these policies as a way to enrich herself, using death as a tool for profit. Her other victims included stepchildren and more distant relatives, all of whom she cared for during their final days. Each time she ensured that they were poisoned, often using arsenic, and each time she collected a sizable payout after their death. The full extent of Roberta Elder's killing spree remains uncertain, as not all her victims were officially named in court records. However, Based on the investigations, she is believed to have poisoned at least 13 people over the years, targeting her immediate family and relatives to collect life insurance payouts. Here are the names of the known victims attributed to her. John Woodward, her husband, poisoned in 1952. His death initially appeared to be from natural causes, but later arsenic poisoning was discovered. Her 4-year-old child, one of the most tragic victims, this child was poisoned at a young age and died, with the cause of death initially attributed to illness. William Marshall, Roberta's stepson, who died under similar circumstances. His body was later exhumed and arsenic was found. Roxy May Woodward, another family member and potential victim. While her exact relation to Roberta is unclear, she is thought to have died under suspicious circumstances related to poisoning. Carrie Mae Woodward, likely another relative or child of Roberta Elder, who also fell ill and died mysteriously. Frankie Mae Marshall, another possible stepson or relative whom Roberta cared for before his death. Investigators later suspected arsenic poisoning in this case as well. 2 unnamed stepchildren. Roberta had stepchildren from her marriages, and at least 2 of them are believed to have died from arsenic poisoning, though their names have not been widely documented in public records. Other unnamed relatives. Investigators speculated that several more distant relatives and possibly additional stepchildren may have been victims of Elder's poisoning spree, but records remain unclear due to the time period and lack of forensic technology to definitively prove all cases. While some of the names of her victims remain unknown, investigators believe the death toll could be higher than officially documented. In each case, Roberta took out life insurance policies on her victims shortly before their deaths, collecting the payouts as her primary motive. Use of arsenic allowed her to avoid detection for many years, as the poison mimicked common illnesses and was difficult to trace without specific tests. The chilling pattern of deaths and the potential involvement of her mother in some of the murders further underscore the cold and calculated nature of Roberta Elder's crimes, which left a trail of devastation in her family. Roberta's mother lived with her for much of the time during the period when many of the murders occurred. Given the pattern of poisonings, it is suspected that her mother may have actively assisted in administering the arsenic, or at the very least, helped cover up the crimes. During this time, Roberta and her mother presented themselves as caretakers for the victims, feeding and tending to them as they fell ill, making their involvement less suspicious. The case of Roberta's young child is particularly haunting. The 4-year-old fell ill and died suddenly, with both Roberta and her mother acting as caregivers. This tragic death, along with others in the family, raised suspicions that Roberta's mother may have been fully aware of what was happening and may have even helped prepare the poisoned food or drinks. There are reports that suggest her mother played a direct role in preparing meals, including bananas and cheese, which were laced with arsenic and served to victims such as Roberta's husband, John Woodward. Roberta Elder earned the nickname Mrs. Bluebeard due to the similarities between her actions and the legendary figure of Bluebeard, a character from French folklore. Bluebeard was infamous for murdering his wives, hiding their bodies, and using his charm to lure new victims. Roberta's pattern of marrying, ensuring, and then murdering her husbands and other family members mirrored this grisly tale, earning her the moniker Mrs. Bluebeard. The string of deaths in Roberta Elder's household did not initially raise alarms. However, after her husband John Woodward's death in 1952, authorities began to take notice of the unusual number of fatalities surrounding Elder. A local doctor, suspicious of the sheer frequency of deaths among her family members, alerted authorities. Medical examiners decided to exhume John Woodward's body for further investigation. When Woodward's body was examined, traces of arsenic were found, leading authorities to suspect foul play. This discovery marked the beginning of an intensive investigation into the deaths of Elder's other relatives. The bodies of several other victims were exhumed, and in each case, medical examiners found traces of arsenic poisoning. Arsenic at the time was a popular poison because it was difficult to detect unless specifically tested for. Authorities quickly realized they were dealing with a serial killer, and the case began to draw national attention. The Pittsburgh Courier, among other newspapers, dubbed Roberta Elder Mrs. Bluebeard in reference to the infamous fairy tale character Bluebeard, who killed his wives. Roberta, however, was not just targeting husbands but her own children and extended family, making her case even more gruesome. As the deaths in Roberta Elder's household began to attract attention, investigators suspected that Roberta's mother had played a role, though they could not definitively prove her complicity. The pattern of deaths, the consistent symptoms of arsenic poisoning, the life insurance policies taken out by Roberta pointed to a well-orchestrated plan that could not have been executed by Roberta alone. However, because forensic evidence tying her mother directly to the crimes was lacking, charges were never brought against her. Her mother's role remains a matter of speculation and dark intrigue. Whether her mother was an active participant in the murders or simply an enabler, the suspicion that she may have helped poison multiple family members adds another disturbing aspect to the case. In 1953, Roberta Elder was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The trial that followed became a media sensation, with the public eager to hear every detail of the case. The prosecution built a strong case against her, detailing the methods she used to poison her victims, life insurance policies she took out in their names, and the pattern of deaths that followed her wherever she went. Elder's defense argued that the deaths were coincidental and that there was no solid proof linking her to the poisonings. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The presence of arsenic in the exhumed bodies, coupled with the suspicious life insurance policies, was enough to convince the jury of her guilt. Witnesses during the trial described how Elder had carefully nursed her victims, all the while secretly administering poison in their food and drink. They also detailed how she had quickly collected insurance payouts after each death, leaving little doubt as to her motive. In the end, Roberta Elder was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The court was unable to convict her for all of the suspected murders, as many of the victims had been buried long before forensic technology could conclusively prove the presence of poison. Nevertheless, the evidence against her was damning, and she was imprisoned for the rest of her life. After her conviction, Roberta Elder was sent to prison, where she would spend the remainder of her days. Her crimes left a lasting scar on the city of Atlanta, and her case continued to fascinate true crime enthusiasts for decades. Roberta's cold, calculated approach to murder, particularly her willingness to kill her own children for financial gain, made her one of the most reviled figures in the city's criminal history. Roberta Elder died in prison several years after her conviction, but the exact date of her death remains uncertain. She never admitted to her crimes, nor did she express any remorse for the lives she had taken. To the end, she maintained her innocence, even as the evidence of her guilt mounted. The case of Roberta Elder, Mrs. Bluebeard, remains one of the most horrifying chapters in Atlanta's history. Her cold-blooded willingness to murder her own family members for financial gain shocked the nation and exposed the vulnerabilities in the insurance industry at the time. Though she is long dead, the story of her crimes continues to serve as a cautionary tale about greed, betrayal, and the dark lengths to which some individuals will go in pursuit of wealth. Roberta Elder's legacy is one of terror and tragedy, as she left behind a trail of poisoned victims, most of whom were her own flesh and blood. Even today, the case is remembered as a chilling reminder of how evil can hide in the most unsuspecting places, sometimes even within one's own family